Hey everybody, I have a video here for you today. We're going to talk a little ancient America. I have not made a video on Poverty Point for about a year and a half. And this is worth repeating. Some sites are very important. Now here's a look at Poverty Point. This is one of the most famous places in ancient America. Here you see the earthworks, the semicircle, and there is some controversy if this wasn't a full concentric form at one time that the river took out. But archaeologists say, well, the river flooded that area a long time before these mounds were created. Are they right? Well, I guess that is up for some speculation. Now, here is a large mound at Poverty Point, second biggest mound in North America. And some say this is in the shape of a bird. But whatever shape it's in, it's a massive structure that would have taken thousands of man hours to build with a large population. And here's a look from the top of the mound to give you some idea how big it is. And this, I think, today goes up to about 72 feet high. But the amount of dirt and earthen material in here is pretty incredible. But here, you see it's not perfectly aligned to the east, but probably was aligned with something in the middle of the arches here, the circular or semicircular earthworks right here. Could have been aligned to something right in the middle here. Now here we are down on Street View. Here is a large mound. We are south of the mound. And if we go around this way, here is what they call Mound 1 at Poverty Point. And some people have called this the ball court mound, but there's no evidence that ball games were played here, but it looks and feels like it. Little plaque here saying what it is. Now here we are in the north part of the park. Plaque here. This is what they call Mound B, kind of on the outskirts of Poverty Point, but they connect it to Poverty Point, part of the place itself. But I think this is pretty important, just the way the mound looks and how we can compare it to other mounds that they say are not part of the site. Now, if we go about 2 miles south, a little under 2 miles south of Poverty Point, we have a mound right down here. This is called the Lower Jackson Mound, and this looks just like Mound B from Poverty Point. Now, Lower Jackson Mound is just kind of off by itself, but there is a little dirt access road, and you enter it right here. And there is a sign right here, so let's just go down. Now, here's the closest road to the site, and I guess you can't get much closer than this. Let's just read the sign here. And here is that sign right off the road. It says Lower Jackson, located 1/2 mile south of this highway, was once thought to be part of the nearby Poverty Point site. However, charcoal found beneath the mound dates it to 3500 BC. There's a window that goes back to 3900 BC, and that's 2,000 years earlier than Poverty Point. The mound was built in a single episode and is 8 feet tall and 130 feet in diameter. And built in one episode, that's exactly what they say about the mounds of Poverty Point. The bottom here it says, this archaeological site is on private property. Please view the site from the highway. So I guess you got to look at it from about a 1/4 mile away. And here's what it looks like today on Google Earth. Not much of a mound remaining, but certainly looks like Mound B in the northern part of the park there. Let's just read about Lower Jackson Mound. Now here is researchgate.net. I will leave the link below. It says Poverty Point is impressive by any standard, as it involved the movement of 750,000 cubic meters of earth to form a complex of integrated architectural elements covering 5 square kilometers. Construction of this complex elapsed over an uncertain length of time in the span of 1600 to 1300 BC. Incorporated into the plan were one of possibly 3 earthen mounds whose construction predated Poverty Point by nearly 2 millennia. Now the mound, a little under 2 miles south of Poverty Point, it says a 4th mound to the south of Mound E extends the north-south axis another 2.4 kilometers, long suspected to predate Poverty Point. Lower Jackson Mound has recently been dated to 3900 BC, or almost 6,000 years ago. Here is Lower Jackson Mound just sitting out there all by itself in a field dating to 3900 BC. Do we have the dating correct on Poverty Point? Less than 2 miles to the north. Was this part of a much bigger city originally? Well, that is a possibility. Now, what I did here is draw a perfect north-south line through the huge large mound at Poverty Point. It goes directly over the ball court or the Moundy Mound, and it connects perfectly with the Lower Jackson Mound, a perfect north-south alignment. But the Lower Jackson Mound is 2,000 years older than Poverty Point. Do we have the dating of Poverty Point correct? Well, there are certainly questions to be asked. But Poverty Point is a huge mystery. A mound 2,000 years older, supposedly, than Poverty Point just to the south. That looks like a mound in the park itself. But let's go take a look just north here. There is also a large mound just to the north of the site, and not too many people know about this. One, probably because it isn't visible, but here it is right here under these trees. This is called the Motley Mound. You can get an idea here of the mound itself underneath the trees. Here is a pic. Here is Lower Jackson Mound right down here, and east-west is going up and down, and north-south is going across the screen. But you see Lower Jackson Mound in alignment with Mound E, the huge mound at Poverty Point, and even Mound B that I showed you earlier in the video. Here is the Motley Mound, and some say this originally was in the same shape as the Poverty Point Bird Mound or whatever it was. We have lost a lot of the Motley Mound. It is now under trees and largely ignored, but this seems to be in alignment with the very center of the earthworks here. Now here on the east side of the earthworks, there is a 25-foot bluff and a bayou down here. And some people think this was a circle at one time or an octagon, but archaeologists say, well, that can't be because these were built much later than the river flooded this area. The river flooded this area much earlier in time. The earthworks weren't here yet. But do they have that wrong? I think they just might. Now here is a map of the site today. These 6 ridges, if they were all laid out in a single long ridge, the line would be 7 miles long. Now think about that and how long that would have taken. On my last video on Poverty Point, I brought up how Poverty Point sits right on 2 different areas here, geological areas that you can see on Google Earth. Obviously, a large amount of water came through here at some point in history and maybe sheared off part of those earthworks there that were once a circle or an octagon at one point. Now here's a look at Poverty Point, a diagram, and then an overhead shot. People didn't even know these ridges were here till overhead photos were published about 50 years ago. And then they got a real good look at the site and what it really looked like. But above a certain level here, these ridges remain. And then below a certain level, the ridges are gone. So does that indicate flooding took out half of this circular earthwork? Well, I just think it might, but once again, archaeologists say, well, that flooding happened way earlier than these earthworks were built. But are they just basing those assumptions on things that we have wrong in the archaeological record? Possibly. But one thing I found interesting is there was no burials found at the mounds at Poverty Point, but there was a lot of artifacts found here. There was really hardly any evidence of living areas near here. They seem to come from a little farther away. So what exactly was Poverty Point? How old is it? I just think it's a big mystery. But there was a lot of artifacts found here. Now here are some small artifacts that were found at Poverty Point. These are, they theorize, maybe weighted down nets or lines or something that had to do with fishing. Here are some, what they theorize are female figurines, kind of like a goddess, a pregnant goddess figure. And that is up for some speculation, but those I've talked about in some of the oldest sites on Earth. Now here's a map of source areas of Poverty Point trade materials. Where did they get their materials from? Copper from the Great Lakes. They got stuff from all over the middle of the ancient United States. Looks like Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, maybe Arkansas. But people from all over were bringing stuff down to this point here in Louisiana today. Now, here is a website that I read, and it was pretty good, and it kind of went over the same things I went over. But it said the preceding view of Poverty Point culture is a patchwork of facts, hypotheses, guesses, and speculations. Many equally sound interpretations can be drawn from the same data. This is the nature of archaeology, trying to describe an extinct culture, especially its social and political organization and its religion by means of artifacts, is not exact science, but it is a rewarding and meaningful one. This little study is not about agreements or disagreements over interpretations. It is about responsibility, a responsibility incumbent on each of us to understand as much as we possibly can about humanity, past and present. The quality of our lives is owed directly to the people who walked on the land before us. The people responsible for Poverty Point culture are gone, but their magnificent achievements and contributions to the saga of human development stand proudly before us today. Theirs is a legacy worth understanding and protecting. So that is pretty well said. So that is a video on Poverty Point. I just find this place interesting. Still questions I think that have to be answered. Site just north and south of it that people really don't know much about. The one south of it dates back 2,000 years earlier than the dating of Poverty Point. Do we have the story correct? When did this flooding actually take place? I think the Poverty Point question still needs to be looked at. A lot of things that we don't know, in my opinion. Hope you thought that was interesting, and you all have a very nice day.